So I recently learned that there is a quick and easy way to make taiyaki, those Japanese fish-shaped pastries that are usually stuffed with red bean paste, by using a sheet of puff pastry. So I made a few different varieties with different fillings based on some famous sandwiches. So first off, you obviously need a taiyaki mold, or waffle iron, whatever you would call this thing. I've had this one for a while, but I haven't used it too often because I usually don't have milk in the house, and buying milk just to make waffle batter just seems like an extra step. But luckily, in this case, we just need puff pastry, which comes in a sheet like this. And for our purposes, this is a little bit thick, so I'm just going to roll it out as thin as possible, and hopefully we'll have enough surface area to make a bunch of these things. Now the first one I'm going to make is the classic New York bodega breakfast, bacon, egg, and cheese on a roll. Although in this case, it's not on a roll, it's in a taiyaki. So I'm going to go ahead and crack and whisk an egg, and I'll cook that in an oiled skillet. Now bodegas tend to use flat top griddles, and the way they make their eggs is rather than a loose scramble, they kind of pour it into a sheet of egg and fold it over onto itself once it's starting to congeal. Kind of hard to do in a round skillet, but once it's looking semi-solid, I'll remove that off to the side. And I'll fry up some bacon until it's nice and crispy. Now pro tip, once that bacon's done, I'm not going to wash the skillet, I'm just going to scrape it down, because one of our fillings later on is going to make use of that seasoning, if you will. I'm going to heat up my taiyaki pan over medium heat until it's too hot to touch without burning yourself, but not hot enough to immediately burn the puff pastry. I'll spray it down with some oil, put one of the squares of puff pastry into one of the molds, then I'll throw in some American cheese. Gotta kind of break it into little pieces, because you actually need a lot less filling than you'd think for one of these taiyaki. Next I'll break off a little piece of egg, because even one egg is too much for this, half a slice of bacon, and then some more American cheese, so that both sides are nice and gooey, and finally another piece of puff pastry to cover that up. I'll close up the pan and cook it for a few minutes on each side. You can go ahead and open up the pan to check its progress. That won't really mess with the pattern or damage it or anything, especially if you have it nicely oiled. And once it's looking nice and golden and crispy, you can move it off to the side to cool on off. Next up, I'm going to make the famous crook, monsieur. So I've got another piece of puff pastry into which I'll put some shredded Gruyere cheese, a few little pieces of ham. Now I need a little bit of bechamel, so I'll make that by melting some butter, adding an equal part of flour, whisking those together until they're nice and smooth, and then adding in about twice as much milk. Whisk that all together until it's smooth, making sure to get your whisk into the corners of the pan, because there could be some lumps of roux stuck in there. Then I'll add about a teaspoon of that on top of the taiyaki, a little bit more Gruyere just to seal everything together, and another piece of puff pastry. Again, I'll cook that on both sides, and once it's crispy and golden, we'll remove it off to the side. And now, straight out of Florida, we got the cubano, or Cuban sandwich. Now, I know a lot of people say that the bread is what makes a Cuban sandwich, so I'll apologize up front that this may be blasphemy for some people, but I mean, I feel like the fillings make up an equal part of the sandwich. So, into our puff pastry, I'm gonna add a little bit of Swiss cheese, some pieces of ham. Next we need some pernil, or roast pork, and I wasn't about to go through the entire process of roasting pork just for this tiny little bit that we need, so I ordered from a local restaurant. It is what it is. Next I'll add a little dab of yellow mustard, a sliced dill pickle, and really I only needed about half of one because the juice would definitely overflow out of this little pastry. I'll add a little bit more Swiss cheese and another puff pastry, and then we'll cook it on both sides until it's nice and crispy. Next up is a little bit of a wild ride. This one's called the Elvis, and this was Elvis's favorite sandwich apparently. So into the puff pastry I'm gonna add a little bit of peanut butter, some slices of banana, and then as I was going through, I didn't read my notes properly, I saw the sliced pickles and remember something about pickles and peanut butter, so I added one of those in. Definitely not original to the sandwich, so this is its own beast at this point. Feel free to name it after me. This is my own sandwich now. I will own that. A little bit of bacon, which sounds pretty crazy in and of itself. Put a little bit more peanut butter. I'll close that up and fry it on both sides. And in this case, the pickle and the melted peanut butter kind of wanted to escape, so, it's just dripping everywhere. But that's alright, I'll just clean up the mess afterwards. Yay. Alright, next up is a fun one. I'll be making a lamb Rou Jia Mo, which is often called a Chinese hamburger. And there's generally two kinds of buns that are used. There's a more fluffy yeasted dough bun that's used for some of them, but I've also seen a lot of places use a laminated dough that's extra flaky, extra crispy. So I think this will go well. So here I've got a lamb shank. I'm gonna strip the meat off of it using my boning knife. Then I'll cut it into small cubes. Tenderize it a little bit with my knife. And then I want to marinate that with some Shaoxing wine, some soy sauce, a little oil, a little salt, and a little cornstarch. I'll mix that together and marinate it for at least 15 minutes before throwing it into a ripping hot pan with some oil. Frying that up until it's browned. I'll remove it off to the side. Add a little bit more oil. Then I'll go in with half a chopped onion. And half a chopped green pepper. I'm going to saute those until they're fragrant and the onions start softening. Then I'll add the lamb back in, along with a teaspoon of cumin, a teaspoon of chili powder. I'm using gochugaru. I'll add a splash of soy sauce, a splash of dark soy for some color, and now I'm going to saute this until the lamb is cooked through and it gets nice and crispy on the outside. I'm going to set that aside to cool for a little bit, and then once it's cooled down, I'm going to stuff it into a puff pastry. Make sure I get a little bit of lamb, a little bit of onion, a little bit of pepper. Close it up with a piece of pastry and cook it on both sides. And if the puff pastry is a little bit bigger than the pan, you may have to trim it off with a knife so it doesn't burn. Alright, next up, this is the New York classic, the chopped cheese. So for those not in the know, the chopped cheese is a bodega classic that is essentially our version of a Philly cheesesteak, but using a hamburger patty instead of sliced steak. And again, this would normally be done on a flat top, especially one that's been used to make breakfast sandwiches. So like I said, I'm just going to scrape off the skillet that we used for the bacon, egg, and cheese. I'm going to throw in some diced onions. Shuffle those around for a little bit, make sure they get a little browning on them. And then I'm going to go in with a hamburger patty. And I'm going to season it with some adobo seasoning. You can also use sazon. As it starts to cook, I'm going to chop up the beef into little granules. Once it's all browned and the onions are mixed into the beef, I'll throw on a couple pieces of American cheese. Let it get all nice and melty. Then I'm going to set that aside to cool down a little bit so that it doesn't destroy our puff pastry. And now into the puff pastry goes a little bit more American cheese, just to make it extra melty. Our chopped cheese filling. And then we need some shredded iceberg lettuce. I've got Roma tomato here that I'm going to slice up, and I'm actually going to dice it so that it fits inside of the puff pastry, but normally it would probably be sliced on the sandwich. And it's definitely tomato season because this looks juicy. Definitely not what you would get in the bodega. They have the mealiest, whitest looking tomatoes I've ever seen in my life. Throw a little bit more cheese on top, and then the other half of the puff pastry. Brown it on both sides. And it's ready to go. And now finally it's time to piss some more people off. I'm going to be making a Jamaican beef patty inside a taiyaki. So I got half a pound of ground beef that I'm going to throw into a skillet. I'm gonna brown that and chop it apart into little granules. Then I'll add in half a minced onion. A couple of minced habaneros. I can never seem to find Scotch bonnets, even in the Caribbean neighborhoods around me, but they're fairly close in flavor and pretty close in heat, so just go with that, and be sure to wash my hands afterwards. Throw in 3 cloves of minced garlic, 3 minced scallions, and now for the seasoning, got a teaspoon of thyme, a teaspoon of paprika, a teaspoon of curry powder, a teaspoon of allspice, some salt, some pepper, and now we need some beef broth or bouillon. I'm going to opt for a Maggi cube that I'm going to crumble directly into the mince. You can also dissolve this in some water and mix it on in, or you can use some fresh beef broth, which is probably the best way to do it and probably has the best flavor outcome. But again, making a bunch of beef stock for this very small amount of patty filling seems like overkill, so that's what I'm doing. I will add in a few splashes of water just so that all the seasonings meld together into a sort of gravy. Then I'm going to add in a 1/4 cup or 4 tablespoons of breadcrumbs, and that moisture is definitely going to help these soften. I'm going to cook this till the liquid reduces a bit, move it off to the side to cool down, and I'll fill some puff pastry with that filling. Close it on up, cook it on both sides, and we're ready to go. And now because the puff pastry is a bit bigger than the mold, you end up with this sort of rectangular shape around each fish. You have the option of leaving it on and having a interesting kind of presentation, or you can use some culinary shears to trim off the excess. I'm gonna opt for trimming these down so that every bite has a little bit of filling in it. So first up, the bacon, egg, and cheese. I mean, what is there to say? This is the classic breakfast sandwich, and the puff pastry makes it feel like a bacon, egg, and cheese croissant, so definitely goes together. Really solid. And maybe you could prep these and throw them in the freezer and just toast them when you need them. That might be a solid on-the-go breakfast. For the crook, monsieur, same kind of thing. The filling is classic. You get the melty cheese, the creaminess of the bechamel, paired up with the salty ham, and it seems like it's wrapped up in a croissant, which really goes far to create a classic croque monsieur kind of vibe. For the cubano, the fillings are key here. Yeah, it's not on a Cuban bread, but honestly, it's a nice little sandwich pocket. Not the best preparation for this, but it'll get you by in a pinch. Now for the Elvis, or I guess we're calling it the Kevin all over. As you can expect, this one is kind of weird. It's not bad by any means. There are pairs of flavors that go really well together in here. Peanut butter and banana, they go well together. Peanut butter and bacon, they go well together as well. Peanut butter and pickles, kind of go well together as well. But the combo of ingredients just don't meld into one cohesive flavor. So it's just a little bit odd. Again, not bad, and hey, it might be somebody else's favorite sandwich, but it's not mine. Now, like I said, the Rou Jia Mo comes on a flaky, laminated pastry bun, and this puff pastry gets you halfway there. As for the filling, it's just a classic combination of cumin and chilies. It's really nice filling with a really nice distinctive flavor. Alright, the chopped cheese, I mean, this is pretty solid. Really, anything beats a stale, crappy hero roll that you get at most bodegas. And I mean, the filling really is everything here. A combo of melty cheese and seasoned beef and onions is just unmistakable. And the addition of the tomato and lettuce actually completes the puzzle. That all together just screams chopped cheese. Pretty solid, not gonna lie. And here we are at the final one, the beef patty. And I'm not gonna lie, this is pretty damn good. This recipe that I put together from a number of seemingly on-point sources is legit. It tastes just like the beef patties that I've had, and I've had a lot. I'll tell you what, it beats some of those extra thin, just flat and tough pastries that you can get at certain places. Not gonna say which places, but you know you've had them, you know you've been disappointed. So who knows, maybe this is the next party snack. Serve it to your friends, see what they think.